Maybe they didn't listen. Now much better, maybe. And also with me having an interest on the last years on AI developments mainly in medical fields. Just a short words on FEAM, the Federation of the European Academies of Medicine. This institution represents 23 national academies in Europe, so it's a large institution based on medicine, medical sections of academies of sciences, and also pharmacy and veterinary. They are elected fellowships of FEAM academies, thousands of the best researchers for across Europe and the whole biomedical spectrum related at the end with healthcare, also providing independent from commercial, political, and ideological, and of course evidence-based science policy advice to the European authorities on both human and animal medicine, on One Health, and also on biomedical research education and health priorities. And the Academy's fellows also serves as individual experts able to engage in a national and European agenda on these topics related to healthcare. We do have the FEAM, European Biomedical Policy Forum, and this forum is a platform for discussion on key policy issues for the biomedical community. And I am so happy of the so many different activities that this forum is having in these days, because the aim of the forum is to bring together representatives across sectors from academia, research charities, industry, European and national trade associations, and also professional lobbies, regulatories, public health bodies, patients and consumer groups to discuss on these issues such as the one we are having today. The type of work is to explore policy priorities, convene experts to discuss and engage in broader dialogue, produce reports that put together scientific consensus about topics of interest for the biomedical era. And this, the expansion of the forum partnerships in these days is to be recognized. There are 29 current members with 4 new partners since this year. So the FEAM and forum activities on AI are just represented in this slide. In 2019, the FEAM Forum annual lecture was on artificial intelligence in healthcare. In Europe, is Europe ready? And we do have the summary report, which is nice to take a look to that, because so many things are already online, what is being developed today. We do have today this forum annual lecture on digital health and AI, benefits and costs of data sharing in the European Union. And the event is supported, as I said at the beginning, by AstraZeneca and the EATRIS, the European Infrastructure for Translational Medicine. And we are so happy to have the scientific director with us today. And he will give the lecture just in a few minutes. And also I have to remember that upcoming European Academy Science Advisory Council, the EASAC, FEAM joint project on AI and digital health that began last June and will be complete by autumn next year. And we are starting with a working group of experts to produce a complete policy report. That's the relationship between the FEAM and the policy forum. And my last slide is to share with you a project that will help on the data space in Europe. This is the Cancer Images Europe, an atlas of cancer images that will allow researchers to use a large amount of data by allowing the already existing fragmented data silos to be integrated into a cloud-based or digital approach linking all that data. And also because we want to have more data every week or every day, this proposal or this infrastructure is linked to the construction of observational studies that will increase the amount of data that will be loaded into this virtually centralized large repository with a central hub based on the data warehouses and the already existing repositories, with the troubles we are going to see today on data sharing, data structure, data harmonization, data normalization, data altruism, and there's so many aspects related to the European health data space. So that was my short presentation. And now, for the sake of time, it's really my pleasure to introduce the keynote presentation. It will be related to the digital health and AI benefits and costs of data sharing, and it will be given by Tony Andreu, who is the scientific director at the EATRIS infrastructure in Europe, but we are so happy that he was able to be here today. So thanks, Tony.
Well, thank you so much, Luis, for your nice words. Thank you to FEAM for this invitation. My first disclaimer is that I'm not a computational scientist. I'm a translational researcher. But as a translational researcher, the objective of my professional life is to make sure that the knowledge generated by science at the end of a long pathway is going to be translated into real intervention on people's health. And this is the objective of the, let me see if I do this correctly. Okay, perfect. This is the objective of this organization, just a snapshot to let you know that EATRIS, the European Infrastructure for Translational Medicine, represents a research infrastructure cross-border organization created by the European Commission and owned by member states, where 14 member states participate with 144 research institutions that are interested in a completely disease-agnostic manner in the process of translational medicine, providing technological capacities and expertise in different areas of basically preclinical research, ATMPs, biomarker imaging, small molecules, and inflammation and immunomonitoring. This is why we are extremely interested in artificial intelligence. And we are interested because, now quoting the title of the lecture the previous year when you said, is Europe ready? I think we are ready. We just have to take one step forward. And this is going to be the thesis of this presentation that I want to share with you. Actually, everything goes around data. And I love this quote from Eric Topol that basically put the point on the right framework. Data is already there. And what we have learned over the last 10 years is the capacity for exploiting and analyzing this data in a meaningful way. And this is what computational science has helped a lot. And that represents let's say, the strategic development of this wide concept that we call artificial intelligence. I think we need to align on the semantics of the concept, because artificial intelligence, when we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about the general concept that refers to the capacity that computers have of mimic human intelligence for performing a specific task. But when we are talking in the context of healthcare about artificial intelligence-driven interventions, we are talking about machine learning, which is this capacity that we have developed over the last few years, is this subset area of artificial intelligence that by which computers learn to perform tasks, and this learning process is based on data. So there are, I think, the last 12 months have been extraordinary in the artificial intelligence domain, and in particular in healthcare. There are 4 key documents that we need to keep in mind, very recent, that are defining the roadmap for the future. The first one, and I really want to acknowledge the effort of the European Parliament, is an extraordinary report specifically focused on healthcare, on artificial intelligence on healthcare, that was published just before the summer, that points to the challenges and opportunities that we have for the implementation of these tools in the real clinical setting. As you know, the regulatory framework for artificial intelligence tools is basically still under the umbrella of the medical devices regulation and the in vitro diagnostic medical devices regulation. Those were regulations that were published in 2017, I believe, right? At the early life of artificial intelligence. So most challenges that we have identified during the implementation of these tools are not properly addressed in these regulations, such as the post-implementation monitoring of artificial intelligence tool. That's why over the last few years, the European Commission has made an incredible effort, and finally, just a few months ago, they published the proposal for the regulatory framework for artificial intelligence. This refers not only to the healthcare domain, but it's an overall regulatory framework on how artificial intelligence should be regulated for having a meaningful impact on societal life. And finally, the ethic guidelines for trustworthy artificial intelligence, which define the ethical and legal framework that should serve us for further development of these tools. And actually, just I think 3 weeks ago, the European Commission published the AI liability framework directive, the proposal for establishing the basis for assessing the liability and the responsibility for the misuse or bad use or harmful use of artificial intelligence tools. So no question that artificial intelligence has impregnated the entire societal fabric, but it's quite impressive to see how machine learning techniques, as this subset of artificial intelligence had over the last particularly 2-3 years a strong impact in the healthcare domain, being present in all the elements of the value chain on how we provide healthcare interventions to our patients. And actually, as you know, digital pathology is a key element because now we have solid and robust evidence that AI solutions, particularly when they are implemented with the supervision of a human being, they really increase the accuracy and the precision of diagnostic processes in the real clinic. Medical image diagnostic, segmentation processes using deep networks for having a precise segmentation, a precise identification of anatomical boundaries and therefore identification of lesions is also one of the examples that we know are really working day by day. Drug discovery has benefited, particularly over the last 3 years, a lot of artificial intelligence because basically machine learning techniques are now widely and routinely used for extracting chemical information from large compound libraries that are absolutely essential for the discovery of new drugs. And other key elements for the development of healthcare, such as personalized medicine, medical robots, electronic health records, of course, they are all impregnated of these artificial intelligence interventions. Even clinical trials, where the use of artificial intelligence models are helping to better select the patient population, applying advanced statistical models to the selection process. So the point is, artificial intelligence is here and is basically everywhere. I think that we have reached a certain level of maturity in the healthcare domain where we need to start structuring this complex landscape. And I think that this is the proposal of the European Parliament report, structuring the AI tools in the healthcare domain, basically at 4 different levels, depending on the objective. Of course, clinical practice, helping clinicians in the clinical decision-making process, biomedical research, we'll share a couple of examples, but also, and very, very important, public health and health administration. Actually, I was talking yesterday to the head nurse of a little hospital, specialized little hospital in the area of Barcelona, who now told me that basically to control the patient workflows, transfer of patients from one area of the hospital to another one, instead of going around the entire hospital, she sits in front of the commandment unit, and then decisions can be made on site and can be made efficiently, which is the most important element. So, of course, medical imaging is, I would say, one of the stars, or the proof of concept that artificial intelligence must be incorporated at all levels of the medical value chain. And of course, segmentation with limited human supervision using these deep network models can automatically localize the precise location of one lesion. You all have experience, and this is really, really exciting, and it's all going. Well, but because of this explosion of possibilities, we have to be aware that we are working with a relatively, I wouldn't even say relatively, with a new instrument where we have, as a community of practice, relatively little experience. I don't know how many computational scientists are here, but you recognize that from the clinical perspective, this is something that arrived to our life relatively late, if not very late. So there are risks in the process of implementation. And of course, there are two clear risks. One is patient harm due to artificial intelligence errors. Another is the misuse of these medical tools. So the consequence of an error or a failure in the implementation in real world of a medical artificial intelligence solution, a medical artificial intelligence algorithms, could be potentially really damaging. And the causes are pretty well established so far. One is the noise and the artifacts that are produced during the process of data acquisition for training artificial intelligence algorithms. I think one classical example is ultrasonography, where the acquisition of data depends also on the expertise of the operator, and actually, in fact, also on the collaboration of the patient himself or herself. And I think one of the most important elements that we have to be careful is on data shift between the AI training data and the real world data, because one common problem that happens and appears very frequently is when the statistical distribution of the population where this algorithm is going to be implemented has shifted from the statistical distribution of the population where the data were acquired. And this is something that requires evaluation and extensive validation. And of course, unexpected variations in clinical context and environment, because the specific context where one data set was collected may dramatically change during time because the processes and clinical workflows change, or the machinery changes, and so on. This, of course, the consequence of that could be misdiagnosis, potentially of life-threatening conditions, and of course, false diagnosis and inappropriate implementation of the decisions with a particular patient. The important thing of being aware of this risk is that we can implement specific mitigation measures. And in terms of making sure that the process of training an algorithm is going to continuously and efficiently flow to the process of implementing that algorithms, comprehensive multi-center evaluation studies are very important, particularly focused on identifying the instabilities of the data sets that we use for training the algorithm versus the validation population versus the population where the implementation of that AI solution is going to happen. And I think one absolutely important element is that we all have to agree that AI tools are assistive tools to the human decision process. They should never be, in the health context, fully automated tools, and we should supervise, and you should use them to assist our clinical decision process. As I mentioned before, one of the gaps that we had for the development of artificial intelligence in the former regulation of 2017 is that at that moment, we were not fully aware of the necessity of developing traceable and dynamic solutions that we monitor and we can improve over time based on the experience, on the effects of the implementation on that particular solution. But even if the instrument that we create is perfect and is robust, it's going to be used by humans. And of course, even the best instrument misuse can lead to errors. And here is probably strongly believe the big challenge that as a community of practice we have for an efficient implementation of artificial intelligence in the clinical context. Because we cannot use these tools properly if the clinicians that have to implement in the real world these tools have not participated in the design of the tool. Something simple such as developing a particular artificial intelligence solution for answering a clinical question cannot be done exclusively from computational scientists because they are not experts on the clinical challenge that we want to solve with a particular solution. And like many other areas of biomedical research and modern clinical implementation, there is a real lack of training in the area of artificial intelligence among healthcare professionals because simply these solutions were developed very recently, and I don't remember that when I did, of course, my medical degree or my PhD, someone was telling me about what artificial intelligence was. I remember a movie from Steven Spielberg. That was my only reference. And we are also in a particularly challenging moment because now there is I would say, an uncontrolled proliferation of easily accessible online and particularly mobile AI solutions that have not been properly regulated, have not been properly supervised, and they are widely available to the citizens. Of course, that means that we have to be extremely determined in implementing mitigation measures over the next few years to make sure that the design of algorithms is user-centered, is done in the process of co-creation with those that are responsible for the implementation of the clinical decisions, in particular for the clinicians, who are those that know better than anyone else the context and the challenge that a particular artificial intelligence solution wants to tackle. And it's, of course, important. Now we have the possibility of opening the scenario of training the new generations of doctors for artificial intelligence, integrating these tools in the curriculum of medical schools. And of course, the general public, because we need to be absolutely determined in contributing in the creation of new literacy programs, because we desperately need to create trustworthiness in the society for the use of this particular solution. And at the end of the day, policymakers and authorities also taking one step forward in being more precise in establishing a better regulation and information on the emerging AI technologies. There are other risks that are more, I would say, they belong to different spheres, and one that you are, I think, fully aware is the bias in medical AI that can perpetuate inequities. Data sets that are going to use for training algorithms for a particular clinical conditions, they have to represent gender elements or ethics element or socioeconomic. So, as you know, we have a pretty bad experience in the past in the development of clinical trials in the US when we accumulated evidence that in most cases the clinical trials were biased towards the ethnicity of the population, so they were trying to apply the drug, the approved drug to a different ethnic group. Situation was not, I mean, the results were not positive. And I think it's well known that this was particularly damaging for Afro-American population in the context of the US. And this element of transparency, which is related to the concept of trustworthiness, helping the society to understand the power of the solution, can be approached in different ways. As has been suggested, the development of an AI passport for documenting the entire characteristics of the model, including the elements of traceability and explainability. Just to review the concept, traceability refers to the transparency of the AI development, of the process of AI development, while explainability refers to the transparency of the AI decisions themselves, okay? And of course, privacy and security issues, the federated approaches is going to be one of the key elements, so we make sure that data does not have to unsafely travel from the place where the data was produced, gaps in accountability, and of course, several implementations in the culture of the healthcare domain. And this is where the European health, when the European health data, let's say, emerged as a big strategy from the European Commission to try to make sure to develop the specific strategies for assuring an efficient implementation of artificial intelligence solutions in the healthcare domain. So as I mentioned before, just a few months ago, the European Commission published the long-expected regulation on artificial intelligence, the regulatory framework. This is something that is at initial stages and has to be further deployed. It affects not only the healthcare domain, but the entire societal fabric. And basically, the strategy that the Commission followed was the principles that were set in 2019 by Germany that tried to develop conceptually what we call a pyramidal risk assessment profile, identifying interventions that go from minimal risk to unacceptable risk, identifying an acceptable risk or naming an acceptable risk to the use of artificial intelligence solutions to situations that are not go against the ethical principles of the European society, such as, for instance, mass surveillance, manipulation of behavior of the population, and so on. In that case, the regulation establishing that this is prohibited. But in the healthcare domain, most of the interventions we are talking about, machine learning solutions, fit into the high risk level. And interventions, AI interventions that are classified in high risk are going to require a conformity assessment after a process of certification. And the regulation has defined in a regulatory workflow that takes into account, and this is, I think, very important, that if in the process of implementation we observe that there are substantial changes in the way the tool is going to be implemented, this particular tool needs to go back to the initial state to reassure the compliance with the principles of the regulatory workflow. So what the regulatory framework is trying to do is making sure that when we launch something to the market, we are going to control what is going to happen with that particular instrument, and eventually we will be able to intervene and correct if necessary. So the regulatory workflow is pretty tough, and there are strong requirements for these high-risk artificial intelligence tools. And as I mentioned before, most of the machine learning interventions in the healthcare domain fit into this category. Asking, of course, training, validation, and testing of the data that is going to build a particular solution, putting the emphasis on the traceability and auditability of the entire workflow where this particular tool is going to be implemented, and putting also the emphasis of the transparency, particularly to the user. And I'm particularly happy that also the regulation puts a strong emphasis on the concept of ensuring human oversight, because this is probably one of the critical elements. We have to make sure that artificial intelligence tools are going to serve us. We are not going to serve them. And this element, it's important to be present in the regulatory framework. Obviously, the obligations of the organizations that are going to create these tools and are going to implement these tools are significant, and the Commission wants a European registry where artificial intelligence solutions will be clearly identified, fulfilling transparently all the requirements that are present in the regulation before they reach the CE marking. This regulatory process is evolving together with an ethical, let's say, dimension that wants to put the focus on the ethical elements that sustain the European values for this instrument that potentially can change our lives. And the principle number one is human agency and oversight. And I think this is important because this somehow reflects or wants to reflect the overall values of the European community. Obviously, elements of technical robustness, privacy of the data to be compliant with the regulatory framework, GDPR regulations, and also let's say the conceptual framework of how we understand privacy in Europe, putting the emphasis on transparency and making sure that these tools are going to promote the diversity and are going to promote non-discrimination approaches in the way we deliver healthcare. So I'm going to conclude in the next few minutes, but before that, I want to put an emphasis on one particular element. It's an element where EATRIS is particularly interested, the European Organization of Translational Medicine, in this kind of journey that we call the machine learning-driven solution, and that at the end has something that is going to have a positive impact on people's health. Everything starts with analysis of the data. And for being able to analyze the data, we need to have a full process of digitalization of this data, because data sources, they emerge from different data. Is this me? Probably, right? From different data providers, from different data frameworks. But what is important is that in this very beginning moment where we are going to digitalize the data that is going to use for training algorithms or whatever, we have to make sure about the quality and reproducibility of the data. And here we have an enormous task, because all data that is in our data health universe, we still have to work a lot on the quality and reproducibility. Just 5 ideas on how to construct this space where data collection and the process of data sharing is going to be the backbone for the development of artificial intelligence solution. One of the key elements, as we mentioned before, Luis mentioned this interesting project that I want to say a couple of words about that, about this concept of federated data sets, because we want the data to stay at the place where the data was produced and reassure that there are data standards and interoperability tools that guarantee that there is not going to be an unsafe transfer of the data. This is an essential element for promoting the trustworthiness of artificial intelligence in the European population. And of course, the principles of verification, and you all guess are familiar with the concept of FAIR, data has to be findable, interoperable, accessible, and reproducible, should be the way where data hubs construct their local data sets and their local data environment for participating in these federated solutions. Of course, without forgetting the ethical and legal perspective, which is possibly going to also to change during time, and we have to keep an open dialogue with our policymakers to make sure that whatever we do at the data level is going to fulfill the requirements of the society from a legal and ethical perspective. And the reality is that there is huge excitement. Precision medicine, personalized medicine is based on this concept, integrating multiple data sets for being able to stratify patients and develop patient-targeted solutions. It's quite paradoxically to think in the personalized medicine domain that for having an answer at the individual level, we have to know the big level, right? And this is one of the beautiful things. I think that we have to tell people that when we are exploiting their data, we are also helping others. And this is one of the key elements that should sustain the ethical narrative, I would say, of artificial medicine. And this is not going to be something static, because artificial intelligence goes and comes along the entire patient journey, and different, let's say, data approaches and data structures and different methods for data analysis are going to accompany the patient through his or her journey from the prevention to the treatment to the follow-up. So we have a very recent example on how the power of big data using artificial intelligence has, let's say, a strong impact on organization of healthcare model. That was COVID-19. The epidemiological, let's say, analysis of risk during the pandemic took into consideration and was based on artificial intelligence solutions that were able to analyze through machine learning approaches online databases, public databases, hospital databases to define specific epidemiological interventions. And we see instruments that are already there and can really help to really implement specific solutions in the healthcare domain. Just a couple of very simple images. This is a beautiful paper that was published a couple of years ago demonstrating the use of digital pathology, artificial intelligence approaches for digital pathology in prostate cancer. And this has also impregnated the biomedical research field when in this paper published just a couple of months ago, Su and collaborators were able to elucidate tumor heterogeneity, resolving especially transcriptomic patterns, identifying the beautiful transcriptome profile at the subcellular level, providing, let's say, new approaches to the use of having a better understanding of transcriptome reality in the area of cancer as well. But the big thing that probably has happened in the last few months has been the publication of the regulatory framework for the European health data space. This is going to be the big adventure for the next year, and I'm pretty sure that if you meet again in 12 months, it's going to be fascinating news about a specific development of the strategy of the European health data space. The European health data space, as you wants to be the framework by which the European Commission and the member states want to create the data standards and the tools for data interoperability that will reassure and maximize an efficient cross-border use of data, providing specific solutions that will not be compartmentalized depending on the country one particular citizen comes from. And this is not just words. The process has already started. And very recently, the Commission funded 2 prefigurative instruments that should define some key elements for the future implementation of the European health data space. One is the TIDAS joint action, that joint action where 25 European countries participate, that provides benchmarking analysis, develop concepts, and specific recommendations for the secondary use of health data. And the pilot studies for the European health data states that want to create and test a first version of what this concept of the European health data space should be. And there are already in the pipeline specific projects that want to be demonstrators at the cross-border level of creating data standard and data interoperability. And I think one of these is the project UKIM. I don't think Luis mentioned, but Luis is the coordinator of the project, and I'm happy to be part also of this journey. This is going to be fun. It's going to be fun. It's going to be challenging because the objective of the project, as Luis mentioned, is going to create a digital federative infrastructure of cancer imaging, cancer images and related patient data as a proof of concept that these principles that were set in the European health data space are potentially possible to be brought to clinical practice. And this is going to be an exciting journey, and I think we should feel all part of this excitement because we are at the border of jumping to a new era where medicine is going to deliver possibly in a different way. At the end of the day, what we want is that citizens have a better control of their own health data, and the European health data space has the ambition of tackling the borders and the interoperability barriers that do not facilitate the use and the access of human health data to the patient and the clinicians that have to have the responsibility of leading a specific intervention. Here is where the role of the patients and the role of the citizens becomes the core of the concept of the European health data space. Because, and I think this is my last thought, and I'm pretty sure that you all agree, if what we want is to re-engineer the system, introducing computers in the clinical decision-making process up to this level of depth, we want to make sure that patients and citizens are going to be fully convinced and are going to be part of the journey with us. And this means that we have to make this effort of transparency at all levels of the value chain and having more clear than ever that a medical intervention is a core responsibility, not only between the clinician and the healthcare provider, but also with the patient and with the society itself. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tony, and I think you're going to join us for the first panel, isn't that right? Yeah. Unfortunately, you then have to leave, but thank you for what I think was really a tour de force of a really complex area, but Tony made it very straightforward and simple, so thank you very much indeed, really important. I'm just going to go up to the platform now. Cannot join us today, but we do have a video, is that correct? Yes, we do. So Christian is a member of the European Parliament. I've worked with him on quite a number of occasions. He's been very supportive, particularly in the work on cancer and cancer research in Europe, and he actually chairs the intergroup. So we're going to hear from Christian now, who's going to say a few words.
Good afternoon. Thank you to FEAM for inviting me to the discussion on digital health and artificial intelligence, benefits and cost of data sharing in the European Union. And sorry that I cannot be present in person as I have to chair the ITRE committee meeting, the dialogue with Vice President Vestager, also covering issues related to digitalization. Nowadays, in the 21st century, when access to health services should be fundamental, according to the last surveys conducted by European Commission, OECD and WHO, there is still an unequal access to health services throughout EU, and member states still have an inadequate primary care structure. Patients go with paper dossiers from one clinician to other. 80% of the healthcare costs are linked with non-communicable diseases and readmissions. Services are fragmented, prevention accounts only on average 3% of the total spending of health budgets. All these problems could be solved, or at least part of them, if we invest and develop the digitalization, and if we concentrate on a large innovative intake, which envisages a high part of artificial intelligence in healthcare and more new technologies, data sharing, and a health data space. The healthcare switch to more preventive medicine indicates a transformation that guarantees patients access to health services as well as the optimization of health services. Even to digital health and digitalization, healthcare has proven to contribute at addressing the challenges in the health sector and has a great potential in making our system more resilient. We are far from reaching its full potential. The success of the digital transformation in health and its enormous beneficial impact on patients will depend on how much we plan for the next 5-7 years from today. Data and data sharing are expected to bring benefits to citizens' health, improve healthcare delivery, transform and upgrade healthcare systems, and speed up the development of new medical tools such as medicines, vaccines, and diagnostic tests. One of the priorities I have as Chairman of Industry, Research and Energy Committee and Rapporteur for the EU for Health is to bring innovation in the health sector and digitalize healthcare, in particular through the creation and application of European e-health record and the support for the creation and use of health data space future platform. Whether Europe will be able to harness its World Health system or not, health and care are rapidly digitalizing and integrated artificial intelligence. Prevention, telemedicine, and monitoring, population health management, personalization, innovative clinical trials and medical devices, precision medicine, and advanced modeling are key growth areas, and they all require reliable data, legal and regulatory certainty, and trustworthy IT and governance. The European Health Data Space is the first sectorial legislation meant to build on the Data Governance Act and the Data Act, respectively the horizontal legislation on data governance and a recently presented EU law on data sharing. It is about exchanging patients' data in a safe environment that's supporting and promoting research on medicines or treatments. It will make it easier for a patient in Romania, my country for instance, to access a prescription in a local pharmacy from another country, or for a doctor in an emergency room in everywhere in the Union to access a national patient's basic health information. This means that we need a system to have mandatory requirements on interoperability and security. Health communities, including patients and health professionals, innovators, regulators, and policymakers, all form an essential link in the health value data chain. However, regulatory and legal challenges continue to limit access to health data, and this comes between developing new solutions for treating patients and advanced personalized medicine and treatments. This is a need for clear rules under which the medical technology industry can collect, process, and share health data. The varied implementation and interpretation of GDPR by national and local authorities create considerable legal uncertainties, resulting in barriers to health data use. I'm also the rapporteur on behalf of EATRIS committee on this important legislation, European Health Data Space, and of course, as also an active member in ENVI, I will take part actively in the debating, amending, improving the proposal of European Commission. And the input from such important organization, such experience and expertise, like the Federation of European Academies of Medicine, of FEAM, will be extremely important. So please, I will count on your expertise to bring me and my colleagues the best ideas to improve the legislation concretely, and also working together in order to have the best legal framework in order to advance quickly, rapidly in the direction of having the best rules for health data. The potential of health data will lead to better health outcomes, making it easier to share the data with different healthcare professionals and in different settings to enable the delivery of efficient and quality healthcare provision. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Christian, and really value your support as well, which is really important in this regard. What I now want to do is go into the panel discussion. And first of all, I want to introduce the panel. Just to let you know, I'm Mark Lawler. I'm Professor of Digital Health at Queen's University, Belfast. I'm the AI expert for FEAM, but also I'm Scientific Director of DataCam, which is the UK's Health Data Research Hub for Cancer. And what I've asked is for each of the panel just to introduce themselves, but also to say what is the particular area that they're really interested in, and also what is challenging about what we're trying to do as a society in relation to the use of AI and digital health. So I'm going to start with Alan.
Thanks, Mark. My name's Alan. I'm a physician in London and a lecturer at Imperial College. I'm also a research lead at Google Research, where I lead a team applying deep learning to healthcare. And sorry, what was the second bit?
The second bit, what's the particular area that you think is the most important at the moment in the AI digital health space?
I think for me, the thing that's the most important is the last mile and crossing it responsibly. I think you know, the nail was hit on the head that there's a real mismatch between exciting research and clinically useful and validated technology. And I think the next 3 years are going to be very key in terms of establishing trust, building the right kind of evidence base, and finding clinically and cost-effective ways to use the technology for people's benefit.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. Janos?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm Janos Tolias, and I I'm a lawyer at the European Commission, working in the Directorate General of Health, and more specifically in the team dealing with AI in healthcare and health data. So I was involved in the development of the AI Act, the AI liability proposals of the Commission in the European Health Data Space team. The most important, I think, for me would be to, we have seen a number of AI-based medical devices being developed and got the FDA approval or CE marked, but we have not yet seen high deployment, actual use actually of AI in clinical practice. So for me, I think it would be to see how we can see this move of this research and development into real actual use of AI in clinical practice. And what are the root causes for why not? Or these rather slow deployment.
Thank you very much, Janos. Margie?
Hi, my name is Margie Sheth. I'm the Director of Data Policy at AstraZeneca, based in Cambridge, UK. My background is on collaborative team science and developing large data sets for public consumption. And now I work within AstraZeneca to develop our position, which has been developed, but also embed how to practice data and AI use responsibly and ethically within the company in an R&D-driven pharmaceutical organization. I think the points that we would hope to get out of this session today is to actively contribute to the formation of the AI Act and the details of how it's going to work, but find out how it can help us put appropriate safeguards to develop AI responsibly and ethically and usefully for the world without hindering innovation, exploration, creativity that's involved in the creation and development of new medicines.
Thanks very much indeed, Margie. Louise?
Hi, everyone. My name is Louise. I work for Cienzano, which is the Public Health Research Institute of Belgium. And I'm currently involved in the TEDAS Joint Action that was mentioned a bit earlier, and I'm particularly involved in a work package focused on citizens. And so what we've done so far is to conduct a citizen consultation on the secondary use of health data and how they perceive this secondary use and how they wish to be engaged in this future framework. So our perspective is a bit broader, more high level and less focused on specific use of digital tools, for example. But then it allows us to have a more overall overview of what citizens think generally of the reuse of their health data. And so maybe for us, the most important thing is how do we build trust of citizens within this coming framework, but also seize the opportunity we have now, even though health data is already here and it's already been reused, to build the societal hands of what we want to do with all these new technologies and to do this with the help of citizens.
Thank you very much indeed, and really focusing on a very important part of what we want to discuss during the sessions today. Luciano.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. Luciano Floridi, Italian, but who has lived now for 35 years in that small island called Britain. Thank you, Brexit. I like to focus. I'm a professor of philosophy and ethics of information at the University of Oxford, and I'm also a professor of sociology of culture and communication at the University of Bologna in the law faculty. And I know that I have another 60 seconds, which I'm going to use to stress the importance of the AI Act for our conversation. 3 points. One, we've been here before. The disaster we have seen at the European level of not doing what needs to be done. We are wasting money again and again. More later, if you like. The AI Act risk of doing the same. There are at least 3 problems: scope, accountability, and assessment. I think we can still fix it, but we better do that now, hopefully with the next presidency. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Luciano and Gutsa, and good to see you again.
I'm going to use this one here. Hi, everyone. My name is Gözde Susuzlu Briggs. It's long, just Gözde is enough. I work for European Patients Forum, and also I'm a... Shall I pull it? I think it's... Okay, here we go. So I work for European Patients Forum. I am a project coordinator for digital health data-related projects, and also Data Saves Lives initiative. So we are the secretariat at APF. From our side, I don't know, many of you know about the activities we do with Data Saves Lives, but main focus right now for us with AI, health data sharing, digital health is education, training. So that's the main focus today from my side will be here on this panel discussion is how can we inject the education and training about health data topics to the patient communities so they can be the ambassadors to pass it on to their communities and eventually reach out to actually citizens. So thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Peder?
Thank you. Peder Blomgren. I head up data office in AstraZeneca. We're there to do data and AI governance and policy, and we also drive data sharing both internally and externally. And that makes me a real responsible AI and data sharing advocate. And I'm here to listen and contribute. A lot of data, AI, and digital is being used in AstraZeneca. It's very foundational to how we now operate across the whole R&D life value chain, as we just heard. Because we do, and because we have now activities being performed more with both man and machine, we really want to drive that responsible use and focus on how the value can be had. And we have experiences from that we can share and we can listen so we can help contribute to how we can drive this. And in particular, the AI Act, which I think is critical to make it work in practice.
Thank you, Peder. And Grant?
Hello, yeah, I'm Grant Carroll. I'm a pharmacist working on the National Cancer Information System in Ireland. So that's a longitudinal record that we're rolling out to all 26 hospitals in Ireland that provide chemotherapy or cancer care. So that really focusing at the moment on treatment definition and treatment decisions and the treatment itself. But we have a great opportunity to collect a really rich data set because this is going to be rolled out to the entire country. So every patient who's been treated for cancer will be eventually on the system. I guess in terms of the digitization and what I think is really important, I think what we've learnt as we roll this system out is the importance of the tool being integrated into clinical care. So as we look at digitization, it's really important that we don't impact on the clinicians and we don't impact on clinical care. We don't turn clinicians into data entry specialists. They are actually still able to care for their patients and they have more time for their patients. And then I suppose, we're at step one of that digitization or machine learning diagram that Tony included in his thing. So really thinking about how we can ensure that the digitization of our data isn't, as I say, impacting on clinical care and that the tools are useful in the clinical setting.
Thanks very much, Grant. So I think you can see we have a really strong panel who are going to give up their insights. I'll encourage people in the audience here in the room to ask questions. We have a roving mic. And also I'd encourage, that's why I have my computer up here, I'd encourage people online to also send in their questions on the Q&A. Just in that regard, those of you who might be interested in the Periscope project, we touched on trustworthy AI in the introduction and in Tony's talk. There's a number of links there to the Periscope project, which I think people might be interested in, that Emma's put up. So just for those of you who are interested, both in the room and online. I'm going to start and be a little bit controversial, and this is something I've gone on record as saying before. Europe is very good at discovery, but it's not very good at follow-through. So in the context of that, particularly in relation to what you said in terms of that final step or that last step, what do you think, Alan, are the key ways in which we can actually implement AI within healthcare in Europe?
For me, one of the considerations is about the technological environment into which these systems are being deployed. And typically one of the things about healthcare is, so this is obviously assuming that everything else, the regulatory environment, the trust and safety elements are well taken care of. I think that's an area where the EU is actually very strong. But from a technology perspective, I think healthcare stands out amongst industries because it's very fragmented, and typically speaking, technology infrastructure hasn't been a priority until relatively recently. So I think that's a place where there could be an awful lot more effort and energy, and it's not exciting usually. It's often invisible, and it's often not really a priority for the delivery of safe care. It's not usually most stakeholders' key priorities, but I think that's the kind of thing that will really help accelerate the exploration of these technologies, because currently there are, issues with interoperability, there are issues with connectivity, and often it can mean that for those companies and academics and clinicians who are trying to deploy these systems, the cost of doing so is very difficult at the moment.
Okay, thanks. Tony, you touched on some of this in your talk in terms of implementation, and in a way, implementation is the new translation. And just, where do you think we need to go at a European level and also in order to really implement some of the great science we're doing in AI, in deep learning? But there seems to be that sort of barrier as we get to that final sort of step.
I think that somehow the difficulties in implementation global solutions, global AI solutions at the European level reflects the diversity and the conflict of building a European project. We have seen that in many other layers of the societal fabric in Europe, where we have created a conflict between an overall vision of the European identity with the specific needs and the political context at the European member states. But I think the key here is to provide examples of success, proof of concept that cross-border sharing data processes that develop AI solutions can indeed solve problems. And we need to move from the theoretical, let's say, domain where all these documents stay to a more hands-on element where the citizens, and not only the citizens, the healthcare professionals can perceive that this is true. Because we talk a lot, and I was thinking while we were talking about this concept of trustworthiness, that we put the focus on the citizens. But I think trustworthiness has to be gained also in the group of healthcare professionals that still see artificial intelligence, data digitalization, and data sharing as something that is a little bit alien to their experience. So for me, the key would be to break the psychological barriers that represent the individual identity of communities and individual identity of member states to provide proof of concept. And then there is a strong element related to the interoperability of the tools. And this is something that is going to be definitely a big challenge, not only cross-border, but also within border. Let me give you an example. I'm coming from the northeastern region of Spain in Catalonia, 42 public hospitals. There are 32 different operative systems in the healthcare structures. That's going to be a big challenge there.
So do you think the challenge is actually also within country rather, we talk about the challenges between country, but I think sometimes we lessen the challenges within country, which I think are quite substantial. That's a good example that you've listed there.
Within the country, even within the particular healthcare institution that is responsible for the implementation of that particular AI tool.
Okay, Grant, you're trying to bring in a digitalization and particularly in cancer for the whole of Ireland. What sort of challenges have you seen, and what do you think we can learn from that?
I think that was a really good point made earlier about the infrastructure, actually, and I think there's been, I think it's fair to say that the investment in infrastructure over the years has been quite low, certainly in Ireland. That's what we've experienced. So I think the underlying infrastructure, the underlying fragmentation, as you say, even within a hospital itself, has been very, very complicated. And I think, what we've tried to do is to bring in a system that is across the whole country. So we're talking about data sharing within a country, so everybody's using the same system, one database. But within that, there's a risk of us creating a silo there as well. And we don't want to create a silo of cancer care, and then that's separate from ICU care or GP care and all the other types of care that are really, really important. So I think, always thinking about that risk of creating silos as well, and interoperability between different systems, different hospitals, and then between countries obviously is the next step. So.
Thanks, Grant. We touched there on the idea of education, not only education of the public, but also education of healthcare professionals. Maybe Louise first, and then Gozda, I'd also like to hear both your thoughts on that, and also what do we do about it, because I think there is a big learning gap, and it's not just within the public, it's also within the professionals. So it would be really interesting in both your thoughts on that. Louise, if you want to go first, yeah. Sorry, I'm posing it to both of you, but if you could go first, Louise.
Yes, without wanting to repeat what has been said already, but so in our case, we gathered 6,000 contributions from citizens, mostly from 3 countries. And what is very clear is that there's no one solution that fits for all. We're all different, and we all have different needs in terms of knowledge, in terms of interest. So it seems like a big challenge to know how to address those disparities, and this is why, from a European perspective, we can impulse trying to understand citizens' needs for information and how to engage them. But I think most of it will happen probably at the national level, because within one country, even you'll have also different needs, and each country has a different data culture. Each country has a different digital divide as well. So engaging and informing citizens should happen, but at different scales if we want it to be efficient, I would say. And it also implies informing and educating the data intermediaries. So basically people from who citizens will receive this information, and there's a huge burden, as mentioned, on the shoulders of healthcare professionals as well, who also need this training, but maybe other data intermediaries will appear, and another way of communicating with patients and citizens as well.
Thank you very much. Ngozda?
I'll move to this one. So from our side, from the patients, I mean, chronic disease patients from European Patients Forum, I'm just talking about this, is the same issue, of course, happens. There are different levels of understanding, different levels of knowledge. Of course, we have the beginners, you know, the intermediate and a bit more advanced communities. What is one thing about chronic disease patients, they know about their disease very well. So they are there when they discuss about it with their healthcare professionals, with their nurses, with their caretakers. They are very advanced and they know what they're talking about. But when it comes to health data or digitalization or AI, that's a topic these are the topics that have a huge gap between their knowledge about their disease areas and these technologies. So the same for the healthcare professionals when they discuss about it with their doctors. They can talk about every diagnostics they went through, every disease, you know, symptoms they went through, but they will not be able to discuss about the data journey or what is going to happen when they opt in, opt out. You know, all these concepts, that's just so gigantic and impossible to discuss everything in one go. So yes, there are a lot of challenges, but has to start from somewhere. So with EPF, we decided, with Data Saves Lives as well, we decided to start walking, because there is no way of brainstorming anymore. It's happening. AI is happening, health data sharing, digitalization, it's happening, and brainstorming is good, but we have to start walking and learn as we go. And that's, we think, is education and training should be following that pathway as well. We have to walk, learn, and start gathering as much as we can from the communities and try and reach out to the public through the patient communities.
Thank you very much, Goza. A very important point. A number of you highlighted the AI Act and really the relevance and the importance of that. So I'm going to turn to that topic area now, and maybe Janos, I'll start with you. What do you think the implications of the Artificial Intelligence Act are for life science organizations?
As it was mentioned at the very beginning, back in 2017, when we started talking about AI, the potentials of AI in healthcare, revolutionizing healthcare, and so on, there were a lot of questions. There were a lot of questions of would these systems be safe? What would be the liability on these systems? Where are we going to find data to really train these systems? Would the data be secure and safe when they are trained? So there were a lot of there was a lot of clouds there of confusion, I would say. And now we reached the point, and we'll get back to the AI Act, where at least at EU level, we have come up with, referring at least to the four initiatives that I was involved, the AI Act, the AI liability proposals, as well as the European Health Data Space, which at least they put some foundations of how we understand and see things and how they should be developed and how they should be safe and so on. So now, of course, if you get into the AI Act, and of course we can get into the more details, I'm sure, later, but if you read the AI Act, you will see there is a lot, at least I think what we have managed there is to show what are the concerns and what are the issues that need to be tackled. So as you can see, for example, we have also it goes even beyond the conventional regulatory safety frameworks that we have at the EU law. For example, it also imposes obligations on the user. So in medicine, it would be obligations on the doctor who would be using AI, whereas, for example, we don't see these type of obligations imposed in the medical devices regulations. It also imposes obligations on the human-AI interaction. It also, so at least it shows a bit what are the issues there. It indicates at a high level how they should be dealt with. And now, of course, you may ask, how should we understand, for example, with regard to data? It says, how should we understand data if someone is, the data and bias of data? These high-level requirements now, the Commission is now discussing, and they will issue a request for development of standards to even give more precision as to what these high-level requirements, how they should be understood. So I think now, at least from 2017, we should be more, as manufacturers, let's say, secure as to how our product should look like, as to, let's say, clinician, how I should be interacting with this product, and as patient, at least that I trust these systems that, and this interaction that will be taking place, it would be trustworthy and trustable. And then I can get into the more details, but I think at least at this stage I can give you, I think, what it has been achieved at the EU level, which was a bold step at worldwide to come up with, actually it was the first bloc, I would say, or bloc of countries to come up with a safety regulation on AI, liability regulation on AI, European health data space to collect data and organize them and share them and transfer them. So I think, yeah, that's a bit the big picture.
Luciano, what are your thoughts on this?
Thank you. I agree with what has been said so far, and also with the several points that the keynote highlighted in terms of ethical challenges. So they're all inherited by the AI Act. To put it simply, who does what for what purpose? That's what it is. Who does what for what purpose? And it's always the same problem. The same problem we had with the data. Then you have another problem, which is who controls who does what for what purpose. So that's four. Who does what for what purpose, and on top of that, the auditing. The AI Act inherits all this, and that's normal. That's the good way of doing it. But it has a particular problem, and you need to have a premise coming to the end. Nobody listens to philosophers, so trust me, this is not going to go anywhere. But in the odd chance that someone out there might actually now decide to give it a try, the AI Act is based on a product we just heard, philosophy. We treat AI and machine learning as if it were the system that does something, whatever, and then you regulate that as if it were a microwave. It isn't. Every computer scientist will tell you that, no, contemporary AI is not, no. The algorithm is what it does, and it does that dynamically, learning, etc. So you need to regulate the behavior, the output, the actions of the act, not the thing. If you like the analogy, you should be regulating the cooking of the microwave, not the microwave. We are regulating the microwave, hence the list of all the possible microwaves that you want to exclude, and there will be always new microwaves out there, etc., etc. So unless, no, or until we solve that fundamental problem, some of the issues about who does what, for what purpose, and who controls what will not be solved because we are addressing the wrong item. But as I said, I'd be astonished if anyone's going to listen.
Well, I think we should more listen to philosophers actually rather than less. And one of my big things is we need to be bringing in different areas, sociology, etc., to actually discuss some of these areas in relation to, in my area in cancer research, we need to be thinking about that more. Tony, you want to come in there?
Can I add one comment to what Luciano said, and I completely agree. We were quite perplexed last year when the Commission launched that call for developing projects on AI for provide proof of concept of clinical efficiency. A lot of different actors came to us because we are this kind of a pan-European organization. So we have a little bit of a very interesting helicopter view of the glories and the miseries of the European research area, I would say. And it was very interesting to see that in some occasions, groups of clinicians came, and in other occasions, groups of computational scientists came. But I barely saw real integrated communities of practice of interdisciplinary experts ranging from computational science to clinical research that came to us with a very specific and constructed idea. And over the last few years, I observed how we still need to break what I would call a language barrier between these communities that, although they speak English, they speak different languages. And this is the first step for having a little bit of a mutual understanding of this value chain that we were talking about.
Couldn't agree with you more, Tony. I argue this a lot in relation to, for example, one of the people I work with is a theologian in Oxford, actually, in relation to the ethics of personalised medicine. I think we need to be doing much more of that sort of interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary approach. Margie, just in terms of, from your perspective, where do you see the Act either helping you or hindering you in terms of some of the work you want to do, particularly in relation to both data sharing, but also, say, trustworthy AI?
Yeah, thank you. Let's bring this up. Yeah, so I think there are a lot of opportunities for helping us in terms of, again, the safeguards on how to operate properly when developing, deploying, using AI, because we work in a space that is affecting the healthcare of patients around the world, and not just developing the medicines, but distributing the medicines around the world. So we think it's very important to have those safeguards. In terms of how the Act is structured, we would really love the Act to focus on what matter, the activities that matter in terms of risk ranking and risk management. Because as a company like this, we have a variety of activities across the portfolio. We're not necessarily just interacting with the patients and the clinicians, but the development of medications, the identification of new molecular targets to pursue for a medication, methods development, that sort of thing. We do so much internally that may be 10 steps away or 30 steps away from reaching a patient or even becoming an actual medication. So we see some of these activities as might not be such high risk, and being able to focus on what matters in terms of risk management and prohibition, that sort of thing in the Act would be really helpful for us, because we, again, have to work very exploratory nature of our work. Also, we don't want to hinder that ability to create and develop new medications and develop new processes because of wet blankets on a lot of the processes through the Act.
Okay, and Peter, so is there a chance that we might actually stifle innovation using the approach?
Yes, that's absolutely the worry, of course, but we all agree on the need, and as we said in the beginning, we have taken action because we apply it a lot. We have taken action and been first in pharma to go out with AI ethics and how we apply that into principles. But like Luciano said, it's about how do you make it feasible? How do you get the actual outcome that you want? And we think that the way that the current draft is, it's very broad in terms of definition, and in terms of understanding what high risk means, it exemplifies. It's the Philips microwave, and but we need something that can better help determine what high risk means perhaps with criteria or something like that. So that really what is being focused on is where it matters the most, which we all want, right? And then, so it's the definition, the broad definition, it's the criteria or how to find what high risk is. And then it's making sure that we're not adding additional verification processes on something that is already there. So much of bringing new medicines to patients in an R&D process is already heavily regulated. We have statistical analysis and conclusions on safety, efficacy that goes through different ways of securing that it's happening. With the current definition, it's adding layers of regulation to the same thing, which becomes really difficult, even if you have the full will to do so. If you then, in addition, add on top of that the many regulations we have across the globe, then it becomes even more difficult. So we're doing our very best to help guide this, to be able to bring medicines to patients as fast as we can. But with some changes here in terms of definition, high risk, and where to put the focus, it would be much easier.
Okay, we have a question from the audience there, just behind there. Yeah, no, just so the people online can hear the question as well.
Okay, thank you very much. This is a follow-up question to Luciano. I think in your introductory address you mentioned 3 points, if I remember correctly. So it was not just scope, but also accountability and assessment. And I think what you addressed now was primarily the issue of the scope, which was broad. I was wondering if you could also say a few words as to the accountability and the assessment that goes with the AI Act.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well spotted. So on the accountability, remember the analogy, microwave and cooking. Who is accountable for the design of the microwave and who is accountable for the cooking? If you get it wrong, you start not charging people for the wrong reason. Now, let me clarify this with one specific example so that we're more concrete. OpenAI or open machine learning. A lot of machine learning available, algorithms included, are developed by collaborative enterprises where it's very hard, if not / impossible, to identify, no matter how the legislator would like, the source of who did what at what stage. 15 years from now, those people might have not even been around anymore. The companies have disappeared. Meanwhile, those algorithms have been developed and added and transformed, etc. If that is confusing, just think about the interface of Windows. I mean, good luck in finding out who wrote what and did what in developing that particular interface. So the accountability gets a different kind of, shall we say, problems, which I think are more treatable if you look at the accountability for the use of that particular tool as opposed to for the design of that particular tool. I'm not saying that therefore who cares about the design, but I'm saying why don't we not focus so much more about how you use that particular piece of software? Face recognition is a typical case. We are running the risk of banning face recognition in Europe because high risk. Well, it depends really so much. For what? No, it could be for security reasons, for medical purposes, etc. So, and just a tiny bit on the last point, on the auditing or the conformity assessment. If you look at the AI Act, and I know you know, deep down in the history of the document is actually auditing. Auditing disappeared for obvious business reasons, but auditing it is. And someone has to evaluate that the whole process has been taken care of. Now, who is going to do that? Someone, somewhere, of course, will be hopefully keeping an eye, and that is at the European level. But the actual practices of going to a big company, which has gazillions of people, gazillions of processes, and God knows how many items of AI, and evaluate all that, will be a business thing. Now, are we already considering this, or are we just going to cope with that when the problem arrives? The train is coming. We need to take care of that because the 5 big guys out there, not the usual auditing companies, are already doing it. Not least because they've been in touch with me and they're offering the products, etc., etc. So that would be something that we as Europeans should be considering ahead. Now that the problem is not so big, it will be bigger in the future and it will require more resources to solve it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to the last question before we go for a break. And I'm going to go back to the data, because obviously if we don't have the data, no matter how good our algorithms are, we can't actually achieve anything. So we know now that it is possible to collect daily data. For example, in relation to COVID, we were able to collect data on number of occurrences of COVID infection, COVID vaccinations, sadly, unfortunately, COVID deaths. Why can't we do the same for other diseases, cancer, cardiovascular disease? We tend to have big gaps between being able to collect the data and use it, and it's a lot of the time out of date when we actually get to use it. And maybe I'd go to Alan first. So how do we solve that side of the problem? So we've obviously shown that we can do it on a European level with the work we've done on COVID. But for example, if I'm getting data on cancer and I'm going to come to Grant in a while that's 2 or 3 years old, how useful is that to me in terms of the here and now, and particularly for the cancer patient? So Alan, I'll start with you.
I think COVID is a special case from a clinical perspective in that, it was a really sort of pioneering, time-urgent use case for prospective consent and the embedding of trials into routine practice on issues of like active clinical equipoise. So I think that's something that could easily be potentially adopted across medicine. And I think Scandinavian countries already do this, in particularly, if you look at registries like SwedeVask, Swedeheart, things like that. So I think there are, from the clinical side, there are ways to do that. The thing for me, it comes down to the cost and difficulty of doing so. And the barriers are usually those that relate to the routine infrastructure. Because basically, if you think about the running of COVID studies, a lot of that was done in spite of the prevalent infrastructure. And I think the point someone made earlier about like the number, dozens of different electronic systems in one region, in the UK, I mean, certainly in the hospital I work at, you'll find dozens of systems in one hospital, sometimes dozens of systems in one department. And so I think that's the key, is that if the actual underlying infrastructure is constantly fighting, like if you have a healthcare system in which the people who are responsible for the running of the healthcare system can't, at the click of their fingers, perform basic business intelligence. Like if in your hospital, your CEO couldn't tell you at the click of a finger how many people in the hospital are allergic to penicillin, that's the kind of basic business intelligence that most businesses can just perform instantly. It's a simple query of a database. So to me, there's perhaps this missing step around attention to infrastructure, attention to informatics, attention to information interoperability. It's pretty, technical and boring stuff, unfortunately, but it's maybe an area where policy can really help and can drive harmonization, because kind of ad hoc retrograde mapping, retrograde data extraction, and this kind of thing is painful and extremely expensive. Yeah. The other thing about reimagining that sort of thing is, for healthcare, you can put the unique nature of healthcare data at the heart of how that is driven. So consent, confidentiality, patient empowerment, that could theoretically all be built in to these information models. But anyway, for me, that is a really big opportunity, and it's one where I suspect developing economies may actually eventually leapfrog the United Kingdom, the EU, and the US.
Well, thanks. Grant?
Yeah, I think what we saw in COVID, certainly in my opinion, was we saw a backing from health systems to innovate and to create products that are usable. And I think, in terms of that data collection piece, I think what's really key is that clinicians are collecting the data as part of their workflow. So it's not an extra add-on. So they're doing their workflow, they're seeing their patients, they're deciding on treatments. And as part of that, the data is being collected. So the data collection is helping them in their actual workflow on their day-to-day, because it's what they're doing. And then that data then can be used further down the line for AI or whatever. So I think that innovation piece is really key. I think that we always need to be thinking about the usability of products on the ground in the clinic, because I think sometimes that can be forgotten. I think the infrastructure falls down at times. We've all seen pictures of, workstations on wheels with, 20 of them with signs on them saying "do not use," and 15 doctors standing around one computer. That's not conducive to good data collection in a clinic, because these are very, very busy people. So we need to back it up with the infrastructure. And then we need to back up with innovation and making sure that the systems that we have are really usable for clinical users.
Thanks. And Goza?
Well, it's a bit of a challenging one from our side because it's very simple, but at the same time, very complex topic, AI, because the outcomes are very simple. The impact is actually very easy to explain, but the processes are not. So when you talk about who's responsible, who is in charge, what will happen if there was a mistake, who do I sue if something goes wrong? These are when you come to the practical questions that the patients will ask to their healthcare professional or to the community, that's where the challenges are starting. So when we discussed about, and we're going back to the microwave thing again, but it was a very nice example for the patient community too, it would be, if we don't know the exact outcome, there is no recipe standard, there is a very easy variation and a risk there. High risk is a big question. It can be a high risk for you, but a higher risk for a patient. The highest risk, so you see the scaling up is not easy either. The scaling is not easy. But it's very important to mention about the benefits. It's very important to talk about what will you gain out of these, and it's then you leave it to the society to weigh it. They need to decide its value against its risks, because I mean there is no one solution that's going to resolve all the problems for not only patient communities but for in general the society when it comes to AI.
Thank you very much. And I'm just conscious that a couple of our speakers, our panelists, have to leave. I'm going to give them a 1-minute opportunity to say something, and I'm going to pose them a question. FEAM invites you back here in 5 years' time. What do you hope has happened in that period? And I'll start with Alan.
In 5 years' time, I hope this AI Act has passed and that it's accelerated the development of or the integration of a lot of AI into clinical practice.
Thanks. Tony?
Wow, is this a wish list, basically, right? No, basically...
One wish list.
Yeah, only one. I hope that we'll be able to create, at the systemic level, some sort of virtuous circle where we are going to create a feedback from top-down decisions where the policymakers will tell us what to do. But we are going to create an energy that is going to emerge bottom-up from the real world to the policymakers, and we are going to establish a meaningful collaboration to define the way we want to go. And in this equation, the role of the public and the role of the citizens cannot be passive at all, because if it does, we will fail.
Okay. Thank you. Jonas? Or are you still with us in the next session? You're still with us in the next session, sorry. Okay, at this stage then, everybody else is still here for the next session, aren't they? Yeah. So sorry, do you want to ask a question?
Just related to a comment you made, Peter Blomgren. You said there are already so many regulations, and we have a framework in relation to medicines. And my question would then be, what would be, given the specifics of developments you expect in the field of AI, the similarities, but maybe also the essential differences in regulation network if you use maybe something from the drug field, but there are also specific challenges that may not be covered. So especially when it comes to evidence and the balance between benefits and harms. Yeah.
I think we all want responsible AI, and we want to get new medicines to patients. So very clearly, our core foundations. And we have current ways of securing that is happening. I think we should be focusing on the high-risk areas, and we should make sure that we have good governance of that. as I mentioned, we have already taken our own steps to ensure that this is happening ahead of any, whatever the regulation will be. But really trying to focus on where it is high risk. So, not sure if I fully gotten the question, but essentially using well-established methods that we already have to secure that we safeguard patient safety and that we have good evidence of efficacy, both while developing and when on market.
Sorry, I'm going to, because we're just going to break, but I am going to leave the final word to a philosopher, because it was actually Luciano who has to leave early. Apologies. So 1 minute for your 5-year pitch.
Apologies, I have to go back to the island. Okay, 5 minutes, 1 minute for the pitch. Then I'll split it into two. One, too many years in Brussels not to have this as a slogan. We need to protect the patient more than we protect the data. Trust me, that is not obvious to quite a number of lawmakers. Do not protect the data more than you protect the patients to whom the data belong. We shouldn't do that. The legislation sometimes seems to be going in this direction. The second point, very quickly, is that probably in line with what you were saying, we should really work hard in 5 years, as you say, aligning the bottom-up push for the need of data and AI on top of it with a top-down pull from the legislator. Unless we align these two, we're still going to waste a lot of money, we're still going to waste a lot of opportunities. The push will not be accepted by the legal system, and the legal system will not make things happen because it's just an architecture. It doesn't cost anything. The European health data space is a beautiful, elegant design which has no traction on the ground. To have traction, it requires funds. When the funds are over, we are back like an elastic band, exactly where we were before. I've done this before, and I close here with EMIF, a project, 55 million euros, to unify databases for medical research at the European level. 5.5 years work, lots of money, and I invite you to look on Google what is left of those 55 million euros and all their work. To the extent that actually, no, the TEDAS and EATRIS, I sound 5 million and 4.17. Are we reinventing a wheel? Because trust me, we just spent 55 million doing exactly what these two projects are suggesting to do. Maybe we should just look at the archive, the tools, the practices.
5-year pitch, not what happened in the past. 5-year pitch.
So, in 5 years, hopefully this hair will change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I think that was a really good session, really good interaction, and thank you also for the questions from the audience. And I would encourage people online to also pose questions. We're now going to go into a 15-minute break, which means we're going to come back at... What time do you want to come back at? Just because people... 55, okay? So back at 55. So we're giving you a little bit more than 15 minutes, okay? Thank you. I think we'll make a start again. Thank you very much, everybody, for all your great questions in the first session, and also would encourage you to save up questions for this session as well, and also those online as well. Have my computer here in terms of looking for questions from there as well. I guess one of the things I deliberately held until this side of the break was the European health data space, but it's critically important to how we actually deliver both digital health and AI in the European context. I suppose what I'd like to do to start really is to ask, what are the main obstacles to the European health data space? How do we ensure more effective data sharing and more robust data operability? And how really can some of the obstacles that we've already heard about, how can they be overcome? And I'm going to start with Louise.
My perspective is more based on the secondary use, more than the primary use of health data. And from a citizen's perspective, we started the consultation 4 months before the proposal of the European health data space. Timely. And I think the problem remains the lack of information. and the lack of understanding of how health data is being reused for secondary purposes. But the problem is that on the other side, we're talking about health data. And I think this is the starting point for every conversation with citizens is health data means something more important to citizens maybe than other types of data. And we need to acknowledge this connection and relationship they have with their health data. And so we need to increase information on how this data is reused. In the sense in the type of information, sorry, I was thinking of the information I wanted to give. And so to understand what type of information we want to provide to citizens, because it seems that we're talking about very complex issues with new technologies, we have to identify a bit what is the balance between the benefits and the risks that exist when we are reusing health data, and citizens have views on what are those benefits and those risks, and we need to understand what are their concerns and their preferences in terms of those benefits and risks in order to know how to adapt it to analyze their needs in terms of transparency and of information and what kind of information we need to provide to them. Because sometimes I feel we frame the risks in a way that is not really grasping where are citizens' concerns most of the time. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Per.
So we heard before on Luciano saying we need to match the up and down. So going from concept to practice, I think one of the things that we need in terms of, if we're talking about obstacles, it's and what we saw with COVID as well, it's sense of urgency. It's about what is the benefit that joins us up? Why do I want to be part of this? If I just go back to my family, we have an Alzheimer in the family. My daughter is a type 1. I want to do everything I can to contribute to help that be resolved. And I think when we talk about European health data space and this, there is always a risk that it is concept, and it's a question about how we put it into practice. So choosing those examples where there is sense of urgency, where all parties involved actually has an incentive, understand why am I contributing to this, what am I doing? I think that's really good if I'm thinking about myself as a general citizen, and if we look to our experience in AstraZeneca as well, applying this across the whole R&D value chain. It's not because someone said, now this is going to happen, you go do it. It is because it's understanding where the needs are in the different parts of the business and how you can apply data and AI to make it better, to make it faster, get new medicines to patients in all those steps. So the sense of urgency and where the incentive is there for all parties, I think that's a key obstacle which can be addressed by choosing wisely what to focus on.
So it's really that sort of fair value principle, but applied to the patient or the citizen first, the health system, the researcher, and the industry. And looking at ways in which we then
and also,
work together.
There was some, which case should we start with, and showcasing that this works for something that we all can relate to. I think that will open up both the understanding of the benefit and the risks involved, but you show the outcome. You're driven by the ultimate value.
Janos, in terms of, we've talked about trustworthiness and also transparency, and Margie, I'm going to ask you the same question as well. How do we make sure they're implemented, and what would they look like? In terms of transparency and trustworthiness, either in relation to data, but specifically in the context of AI.
Yes, indeed, I will agree that with regard to AI, I will combine actually AI and health data, the abundance of health data plus the evolution, research in AI, or this new technology, let's call it AI, I think they indeed, so data plus AI equals, I would say, create this potential in healthcare, great potential in healthcare. So I think now the question would be, how do we provide concrete benefits if we put, let's say, the individual in the middle? How do we provide concrete benefits to the individual? And of course, consequently also to the manufacturer, everyone else. But let's just put the individual in the middle. Now, when it comes to the obstacles also of the European health data space, but also how do we ensure we create that thing, that framework, you should, as it is actually, as it's structured, the European health data space into two main parts, primary use, secondary use. Primary use will focus more of how you could use data for your personal health care. Of course, that also means, just to put a concrete example, we say, for example, digitalization of healthcare, everything is becoming digitalized, artificial intelligence in healthcare. Concretely, what it means is, for example, if I'm in a small village in Europe and I want now to consult a specialist in Paris, in Rome, in Frankfurt, to be able to do that, for example, through telemedicine or even being telemonitored, or even, so I created a new potential for me who I would have never really gone to see that specialist. To be able to do that, of course, I should be able to send them my data, what I have in my small village, to send them my data. If I have a teleconsultation with them, maybe using even my smartphone to do something, this data to be transferred to them and so on. And this is a bit what we are trying to achieve with the primary use of data, that you should have immediate access to your data, you should immediately be able to transfer your data, the data should be interoperable, there is different categories in different stages, at least the first two categories, it should be immediately, the other three categories, there is transitional periods, for example, of 3 years, I think, that you need to achieve those, medical images, lab results, and so on. So that's a bit the idea, to make this potential of technology concrete, and that's how we are thinking of how basically the European health data space, how to help this technology. And when it comes to secondary use, just another 2 words on secondary use, is also to create a structure where you also said, are they secure? Are they transparent? Are they safe? Do I give my consent or whatever? Because there were a lot of questions on that, and nothing was being done, and no one was using data, because sometimes they were even saying, researchers, we had this, a lot of them saying, because of the GDPR, I cannot use anything, and so on, which was a bit of a misleading, actually, interpretation that they had of the GDPR, and they were not revealing any data, they were not giving any data. The European health data space comes actually to interpret the GDPR, if we say so, to provide concretely how it will be applied to health data, and how we should understand it, and how it should create this easiness of understanding how you can share, collect, research, use data. That's a bit the idea.
Okay, thank you very much. Margie?
Thanks. So in terms of explainability and transparency, that is something that AstraZeneca has put forth as their principles on data and AI ethics. So it's something that we try to embed within the way we work all the time. I can speak to a little bit more secondary use side than the primary use side. When being able to share this sort of data amongst other pharmaceutical companies through consortia, through partnerships, that sort of thing, it's quite a challenge to make sure the data is truly fair and interoperable and reusable across different companies to start with, because we want to make sure the data has the same sort of anonymization, the same parameter, the same values are collected versus withdrawn, that sort of thing. It's quite difficult just to get it right amongst pharmaceutical companies who all operate fairly similarly in the way they collect clinical trial data and that sort of thing. So I think there's going to be a big challenge in having that interoperability in secondary use data within the European health data space. And we have many lessons that we've learned amongst sharing data within our own consortia that we could try and help apply there. Because at the end of the day, what you want to do is be able to trust the data, and the doctor, the patient, the company, the sponsor all wants to be able to trust the data and trust the tool that's being built by it. And if you don't have interoperable data, you're going to have a more diffuse data set to work with, and eventually your tools are not going to be as trustworthy. Okay.
Obviously, a lot of interest in this area. One of the reasons why we chose to run this webinar, and a lot of players in the field. Is there a danger that the AI space is just going to become too convoluted and too fragmented, really? And if it is, how are we going to stop that from really, if you like, making us, not get the full value of AI in digital healthcare? I'll maybe ask Grant to start on that as I pick up my notes.
I think that's a really good point, because I think it probably, and not to overstress the regulation, but it's not really regulation actually. It's standards around the data. I think is really key in terms of collecting standardized data across, like using standardized catalogs. I mean, ICD-10, SNOMED, things like that. So not necessarily. So I think we have to be very careful we don't stifle innovation. I think if we end up with a small group of big players, then innovation starts to get stifled, and then you end up with systems that, as I keep harking back to, aren't usable. So the data's not getting in there. So I think the key is probably around, standards and having them, in terms of the data that's collected, having standards in place. But it is a challenge, because we don't want too much fragmentation. But then we don't want to have too few players so that we end up with no good products. So, not really an answer, sorry, but certainly a challenge, though.
Per?
I would argue that we're already in a space where we are very fragmented. So, gave the example before, we're being a global company means you operate on a global scale. That, for instance, means we have more than 110 privacy laws to consider when we're working, and of course AI regulation coming into this in different parts of the world, being different as well, and then you have additional things like data localization that starts to make the whole situation even more complex. So, with the best intent, it's a very high risk that things are starting to slow down in order to ensure that everything is done by the book in all places. Just consider SRAMS 2, that's an example of all of a sudden we can't share data between our two research hubs in US and Europe. And that creates a heavy impact on mitigations that needs to be put in place in order to just continue to operate. So I think, yes, it's fragmented, and yes, it would be very, very welcome with some core foundational things that we can apply across. And one of those, clearly, as we've concluded, is to focus on where it really matters the most, so the high risk.
I'm going to switch now to the sort of patient perspective, and particularly questions in relation to equality and equity. So we hear both sides of the coin. We hear digital health is going to bring more disadvantaged communities, it's actually going to make the gap narrower. And then we hear other situations that say we're going to make the gap much wider. One, which one do you think is correct? And two, how do we make it better?
Okay.
Easy question.
Away. So, of course, the digitalization is going to help with the quality of the data, because it's going to make it, easier to collect data that's more closer to a data model, a standard that can be easily used in a bigger structure, in a big data infrastructure. So it's already happening. A lot of chronic disease patients and rare disease patients are using digital health tools to manage their own disease. And communicate with their healthcare professionals and the rest. But of course, it's going to open the gap bigger for certain communities that first, they do not use digital health tools, or they are not literate, or they do not have the means, the minority communities. I mean, different communities, even within Europe, there are so many different groups of people that cannot fit into the current infrastructure of digital health solutions. It's even going to be bigger. What can be done? Magic wand, which does not exist. So actually what can be done is a very slow process, and we should never find digital solutions as one solution. There has to be always a backup solution. There should always be the good old solution that's in place. A little bit with the AI thing, the human side should never be removed. It's more or less the same thing for the digital health solutions. We should always keep our good old solutions in place for those communities that are not willing or not able to actually uptake the digital health future. That's the current way we probably see it coming, but of course there might be future solutions coming as we go.
Okay, Margie and then Louise.
If I can combine the equality and equity piece with the layers of regulation piece together, it's really important for us to be able to continue operating on a global scale as a global company, and that means using global data sets and being able to develop an algorithm, say, to help, say, a diagnostic, using one data set, but be able to apply that to a different country. And if you don't have the data to do that, because the laws and regulations are preventing you from accessing a global, truly diverse population, or a population representative of the patients in need because of regulations, then we're not going to be able to have that equality and equity in the distribution and access of care that we provide. So another angle of this is the Act. We would really like to be able to continue working globally and having complementary policies to enable AI Act to continue working with US and other various countries so we can be able to truly reach the populations in need.
Okay, thank you. Louise?
Well, I'm just going to complement a bit what has been said already, but as regard to equality, from our perspective, and regarding the secondary use, I think it's about the way you're going to inform citizens and communicate with them on what's being done with health data, where here, again, because of the different data culture and digital divide that you have in the population, so I'm just going to repeat, it's about bringing digital skills, digital literacy to the population, or to have different alternatives as well in order to address the different groups' needs that you have if you wish to be more transparent with what is being done.
Okay, thank you, Louise. Very important point. I'm going to turn now to security, which is also a big area that we haven't really concentrated on at the moment, particularly relevant when you think in relation to the last number of years, the number of ransomware attacks there have been on health systems, and Grant might maybe be able to share with us what happened in Ireland. But I'm going to start with Janos, and just in terms of what are your thoughts in relation to that security issue, and how do we deal with it? How do we make sure that, and also how do we make sure that misuse doesn't come into the picture as well?
Yeah, that's, I think, an interesting question. Also, it will, coming back to the patient, I think that will also give the patients the security to also share their data for research, but also knowing how their data is used, or even transfer them from one place to the other for even their own personal health care. So if I may start with the secondary use of data, what that part of the EATRIS is doing, for example, first is provides clear rules on what type of data could be used to be shared. So it has categories of data that could be used and actually it goes to another article, which is for which purposes. So it has specific purpose that could be used. For example, one of the purposes, talking of AI, is the training, validation, and testing of AI algorithms. So, and connected with what was said before, that should also ensure, because that's actually the testing, validation, and training of AI algorithms comes actually from the AI Act. Because the AI Act ensures that if, for example, an algorithm was trained and tested and validated in Japan, if if it's deployed in Europe, it should also equally well generalize and perform in Europe. So it creates this obligation in the AI Act. Of course, at that point, if you are in the AI Act, you might say, if you are a small company, how can I test it, validate it, and with data, European data? And that's where I believe the European health data space would pop in to say, yes, here are the data. You can also test it, validate it, and check it in Europe that you are intending to use it, the algorithm, let's say, that came from Japan. So that's the talking about the purposes, that's one of the legitimate, let's call them purposes, that you would be able to use data, people's data. The other security issue there would be also the prohibited purposes. For example, you wouldn't be able to use them to change the insurance plans of people because you are prognostically determining something on that particular person. Those issues are the ones which are prohibited, so there is a prohibited list there. Then, of course, you may also ask then, however, what if my data are lost when a researcher or they're abused or used in some wrong reason, despite that they said I will use them in accordance with those purposes there. That's why the data would not be sent to the user in their lab, let's say, or in their home to do their research. This data would be, this is what it foresees, actually, the European health data space, that they would be used in a secure processing environment. In other words, if you are training an algorithm, you would need to take the algorithm, digitally maybe, in the secure processing environment to do what you want to do there, and then get out, and then this data would be deleted within, I think it says 6 months. So the data there would be deleted. So they wouldn't be going out. They would be in a secure processing environment to use them. Then, of course, there is more security issues, you may say, there. For example, that you still have to apply to what is called the Health Data Access Body. You have to send your application, that they will check it. Indeed, if you fulfill certain requirements, how, why do you want to use the data? So there will be that control. At that stage there, you will get a data permit, and it will indicate precisely what you need to do and how you do it and what type of data you could use. So, yes, so basically the idea there, coming to your question on security, it provides secure environment in different ways, also coming to consent. It provides not necessarily consent, but it provides ways that you will be ensured that your data would be anonymized or pseudonymized, that they will be processed in a secure processing environment, So it creates this cybersecurity also and all these issues. And the same kind of story applies to primary use of health data. Of course, different infrastructures there, different cybersecurity rules. For example, there you have just another word on the electronic health record, which will be a fundamental piece of that thing to work, that the electronic health record would need to comply with certain requirements, which the main ones are cybersecurity and interoperability. And that would be the way you would be only allowed to actually sell electronic health records in the EU market. So you will create also this obligation there. And of course, recently, 2-3 weeks ago, or a month ago, there was a Cyber Resilience Act, which was published by the Commission, which will be also applicable to the electronic health record. So it's a different piece of legislation, plus the European health data space, that they ensure as much as possible this trustability of the system and how the data are used.
Grant, maybe just having been a recent ransomware attack on the health service executive in Ireland, and I'm just saying, what have you learned from it, I suppose?
Yeah, I think we've learned a lot. I mean, for those who don't know, we did have a ransomware attack in Ireland, and we lost our entire health infrastructure, IT infrastructure, for several months in some cases, and it was we certainly learned a lot from it. we learned, and as I've said, we're somewhat, we're somewhat digital naive, I think, in Ireland, and we did still, despite that, we really found that in the hospitals we were very, very reliant on our ICT systems to operate. And I suppose somewhat conversely, what was interesting was that the hospitals who were more digital naive actually did better because all their records were on paper, whereas other hospitals who were more technical, more digital, had difficulty coming out of it. So. Look, I mean, I think we learned a lot. I think we've talked about infrastructure, and I think that there was a report done that was very useful, and it's probably an interesting read for anyone who's interested in this, in terms of where we were, and it's publicly available. But I think that, it was very clear that I think it's very clear that the infrastructure maybe wasn't there around cybersecurity and around the backup behind ICT infrastructure. And I think that that's a really key thing. And I think there's a risk with, as we talk about all the advantages of digitization, the advantages of potential AI, that there's a risk that something gets installed and then left. Off it goes, there, it's done, and then people walk away from it. And I think it's really, really important that policymakers and hospitals are aware of the ongoing requirement to manage an ICT system. And I think as digitization becomes more embedded, as we saw, those areas that are more reliant on it will be affected more if there's a downtime or if there's a cyber attack. So, and I suppose the other point that's really important and that we've learnt is the importance of business continuity. So I know that that's not about the disaster recovery from a cyber attack or the protection, but the key in having a backup system, I think you mentioned it there, in terms of there still being a person who's treating a patient at the end of the day who knows how to manage them and having a clear business continuity plans. And just what Luciano said, we need to make sure that we're protecting the patients, not the data. And as we think about cyber security, I think we have to be a little bit careful that we don't tip the balance in that we're protecting the data too much and we sort of forget about the key importance of that data to patient care. So we just always have to be thinking about the patient, and business continuity comes into that a lot.
Okay, thanks very much, and really useful to hear your insights of what you learned as well. One of the things we focus on a lot in Europe is public-private partnerships. And some of them have been very successful, including in the data space. I'm thinking particularly the Big Data for Better Health that the Innovation Medicines Initiative has certainly driven some good work in that space. How do we think that the European health data space should interact with private companies or do PPP type approaches? What's the sort of pathway that we feel might be actually effective? I'm going to start with Per.
I think we are already in an ecosystem where we are reliant on each other. So we should continue to be that and work more closely together. So we're sharing data and compounds, and we are leveraging real-world data in many forms and through different channels today. It all comes down to using that to get new medicines to patients. So we're very open to all sorts of ecosystem collaboration and are actively seeking those to help our mutual purpose.
Okay. Margie, do you want to add anything from your side?
I'll just build on what Petter said, that, again, we've been sharing data, we've been transparent about our clinical trials. Someone can request data from us through our clinical trial transparency program and receive the data if they know how to use it properly. We already are in an environment that's where data sharing, where idea sharing, where collaboration, especially with public-private academia, is quite strong already. For the European health data space, we would love to, again, share lessons learned in these ventures that we've been in for a while too, to help make this fit for purpose, not only fit for purpose, but identify where it would bring the most value.
Okay, I'm going to ask them from the patient perspective, what do patients and citizens want from the European health data space? And I'll start with Goza and then go to Louise. So what do both citizens and patients, what's your insight in terms of what citizens and patients want from the European health data space?
So there are two aspects, I think. Before the health data space is in place, the process of reaching to the health data space is making, we need multi-stakeholder discussions, and patients need to be more involved, but not in the center. I mean, they are not the subject item to be observed. They have to co-create. We keep on using the same word, but really, that has to be done all together. So European health data space, before it gets implemented and becomes reality in the national, regional settings, the process of getting there also has to involve more patient input, but real inputs, not the end result, are you happy with this input, but more like, how can we build this together? So that's one thing of the making. But once it's there, it's very important to also take Europe as not one country, because that doesn't exist. Europe is not a country, and it has different members, and they are really different. That equally treatment is very important also for the patients to be equally treated in their own countries. We know it's not possible to do all at once. I mean, member states are very different, but it's important not to leave any national setting behind because they have a more complex infrastructure or they have more needs than the others. So, because it will directly impact the patients, and I'm pretty sure about the same for the citizens in that sense.
Yeah. Louise?
So maybe broader than answering what they want from the European health data space, I'd say what they want from the reuse of health data maybe, and so what can be done at maybe the European level. I think often we think that citizens are very oriented towards the protection of their privacy, but what we find out is that most of them support actually the reuse of their health data and are very eager for those benefits to be realized. Then the question is, what are those benefits? And here they had also very strong ideas of what they consider who should benefit as well, for example, from the reuse of health data. And most of the time they will mention the common good, societal needs, or for example, improving the lives of everyone. So obviously, so they foster that we exploit data for those benefits, but under certain conditions, and I think they want those conditions to be met. One example, for example, of a risk they identify was, we talked about the involvement of private actors. Many citizens feel that they are very much necessary and it's beneficial to have them, but a lot also share their concerns because sometimes they don't understand how it is compatible, for example, to pursue private interest with fostering the common good. And this is a bit an elephant in the room that needs transparency as well. And it's way easier than explaining very complex techniques of how we use digital tools. We need to open the dialogue to explain them how they're involved and how they're going to benefit directly, as well as a society. So that's one thing. And so, yes, so that this kind of conditional beneficence that they believe in is represented in the European health data space as well at European level and then in their own settings at member states level.
You both make some very good points, and it actually brings me back to one of the things I said that I do is I'm Scientific Director of DataCam, the UK's Health Data Research Hub for Cancer, and we work very closely with patients and co-create with patients, but the things that I like is what patients say back to us, and two things that particularly stick in mind. One is Jackie Gath, who's a breast cancer survivor and is particularly interested in inequalities, and she said to me, we thought you were using that data anyway. Why aren't you using it? So there was that attitude, which I think is one that we need to nurture more. And the second one, Pete Wheatstone, who's the chair of our PPIE committee, said to me, not only are we empowered, we also feel empowered. And I think that's a big, I'm actually quite proud of that, and I'm not afraid to say it, but, and they said it to me and said, we feel that we really are driving this. And the other thing that's interesting is, it's not just the patient experience that they bring to the case, it's actually their life experience outside being a patient. And I think sometimes we forget that. We just focus on the patient level rather than saying it's actually, I'm bringing other skills, I'm bringing my own skills. Some of them have skills in IT, for example, based on their careers. So I think it's really important to remember that. But I think that co-creation piece has to be part of how we actually drive things. We've covered a lot of areas. One area I just wanted to go back to was, if we if we think about how AI can really make a difference, are there some use cases that we can really hold up and say, this is where AI has made a difference? I'd just be interested in each of the panel just giving me an example of that they either think is there already or they know about that's maybe coming along. Because I think one of the things we need to do is to highlight, you know, where in the real world is this going to actually make a difference. So I'm just going to ask each of the panel. I'll start with Jonas first, just in terms of where do you think it's making a difference now, or has the potential to make the difference in the near future?
Yeah, I'm trying to. Okay, of course, if we think of it, AI in healthcare, at the moment, the systems are solely used to provide information to physicians, to clinicians, and then they act on that information. So despite that sometimes we're talking about robotics or whatever, we're not yet into a fully AI-based autonomous robot who is performing the work of a physician. So if I keep that aside, of course that could happen, let's say after some years, but if I keep that aside...
I think it's something slightly smaller, but anyway.
Yeah, if I keep that aside, I think what it could revolutionize really and concretely help patients specifically is to find the right collaboration between the human and the AI. I think for me, if it's a diagnostic tool or something else, I think the most important for me will be that collaboration.
Okay, Margie?
Thank you. I see the most value already created with AI assisting and enhancing what humans are already doing. So for example, digital pathology and diagnostics is a very big one that's been mentioned a few times here. Personalized medicine and assisting to find that right patient to the right treatment. And internally at AstraZeneca, we've also had a lot of biological insight and knowledge graph technology used. So this basically sets a connection, a network of facts about a disease, the genetics, puts it all in context together, patient populations, proteins, compounds, put it all together to try and build new connections between areas that we previously did not see connections before. This is being used to help try and generate new targets, new patient cohorts, new patient subpopulations, and it's also helped to generate AI-generated drug targets as well. So we see a lot of benefits already in that human and machine working together to amplify and speed up what humans already want to do.
Okay, thanks. Louise?
So obviously, speaking directly about artificial intelligence for me is a bit more complicated because we didn't mention this specific issue. Regarding new technologies in general, it was interesting to see how citizens have a kind of love-hate relationship in the sense that they perceive it as a risk always for more abuse, but on the other side, when they call on what safeguards they think should be in place, they say technology. So there's a bit of kind of this love-hate relationship, but if I try to give an answer, and for what regards public trust, I think it remains to be seen if the use of these tools are going to bring more issues and increase or decrease trust. But I don't think that public trust will decrease as long as whatever the process and the tools you use, you still reuse health data for the benefits the citizens think are appropriate and in a safe way, and you're capable of demonstrating. So, I would say.
Okay, thanks, Louise. Goza?
So, no concrete examples from my side either, but we did this year at the EPF Congress, AI series game, a board game. We kind of worked with an organization that's building those games to be able to actually show the patient communities the real thing that once it goes to the hospitals. So it was a board game hospital where we built up them choosing AI solutions or no AI solutions, and they see the time lost or time gained or costs or gained. So it was quite simple at the beginning because we're going to build it next year. We're going to use Data Saves Lives bootcamp actually for this purpose to build this board game further so that we could really concretely explain to our communities what are the benefits, but what are the potential things that might be risks that you would like to raise questions about. We are very afraid of giving false hopes. It's very important in the patient community, the same for medicine development, the same for AI solutions. We have to be careful the way we're wording it when it's a use case as well, that it is not something you'll be able to use tomorrow, or it's not happening yet. These are the amazing, important communication things we need to be very careful about. But we're very excited about this board game. Just, I could maybe mention that.
I love that idea. You'll have to show me that, because I
Will
think that's
do.
great.
Yeah.
Peter.
I was tempted to continue on how we apply it in R&D, and building on that, I would say using AI for biologics engineering, finding new medicines, it's a very big area that's coming as well. But the real answer, when I was thinking about your question, is seeing my daughter with type 1, having now a sensor that's AI powered, where she gets a better control over her insulin levels. That means she can focus when at school, when they have tests, and not be a wreck and angry or down in these flows, and hopefully have a longer, more healthy life. And to me, that's real, and that's effect now. So we can see this being applied across R&D to get new medicines and treatments into play, and they are also in play, and I think that's why we're all here.
Thank you very much, Peter, for sharing that personal example with us. Grant?
Yeah, I feel my use cases are maybe a little dull, but I'm going to tell you now. I mean, and I hope it speaks to the reality of clinical work on the ground, and I think you're probably all aware that the documentation burden on clinicians now is significant. So some of the work that's starting to happen in Ireland, which I'm not involved in, but I'm seeing it happen, which is really quite exciting if you're used to this documentation burden, is trying to take some of that documentation burden away from clinicians or even from hospitals themselves, data managers, so that things like audit or claiming for drug cost or, data cleaning of accreditation information, that kind of thing that is sort of, I suppose, repetitive and relatively simple in some senses, but is open to error, that's sort of being taken over by some sort of AI solutions, I think is really, really helpful, because I think what it ultimately does is it means it frees clinicians up to do clinical work rather than doing audit stuff and paperwork. So I think that's a little dull, but I think it's a really good example of how AI can actually make, get clinicians where they need to be. So
It's all is good. Louis? A question there.
Going back to the data sharing trouble and the limitations of access to data, I was willing to know your feedback on the way we can empower patients by data altruism or data donors, allowing them to allow their data to be used all over their life for these secondary researchers purposes.
Goza?
Okay, yeah, so it's a very sensitive topic, actually. At the EPF, we're just moving away from ownership. So we really convinced the community that we don't own that. The word my data is too emotional, too sensitive, too possessive, that actually it's not totally yours, but you have the right to control it, and because it's part of you, and you should be able to manage it, and you should be able to defend if something goes wrong. So the altruism logic, that's just been settled in-house, let's say. But when it comes to now European health data space with the secondary use or the opt-in, out concepts, there is very little knowledge about the concepts. So people, if it has been implemented too prematurely, people will do a bit like they do in the cookies, like they just want to move to the next page, so they will just click, some people. But some will read through and get more panicked because there's so much text in there. So it's very important, I'm going back to the beginning, is the education, the training. People really need to understand what they are consenting or they are moving forward with. I don't think there is a big, I think we just agree on the sense that people are willing to, you know, have their data. They don't want to sit on their data, and they don't want you to sit on their data either. But they would like to make sure that it's not used for purposes that they would never approve. So I think for that, they would need to understand what's written on that text before they tick it in or tick out. I think that's where we are, but it's a slow process, I would say.
Okay, we've had a really interesting session. I'm going to go back to the question I asked to the speakers who had to, or the panelists who had to leave at the end of the first session, but I'm not going to ask you the same question. So I know you all had the question prepared, but I'm going to ask you a different question. You're over in Berlaymont. You get into the lift on the first floor. The lift goes up to the second floor. Stella Kyriakides, the health commissioner, gets into the lift. She presses for the 6th floor. You have 1 minute to do an elevator pitch to say, what is it that you want her to do in the area of digital health? I'll start with Grant.
Well, you're going to start at the other end. I mean, so many things. I think, you know, the one thing that I keep harping on about and that we keep talking about is usability of systems. So I don't know how I would pitch this, but I think, you know, in terms of, we have to be very careful that regulation isn't so prescriptive that we don't see usable systems being put in place. So I think, you know, somehow balancing that triangle between vendors and usability and system creation, policymakers and the patient as well, to make sure that everything's working together. But
and what happens when she asks you how much will that cost?
I think what I'd say is that I think you've always been underestimating the cost, and we need to start investing in this. So.
Okay, thanks very much. Very good answer. Per?
I would start with data saves lives. There you go, with responsible AI. So to get new medicines to patients, we can leverage this. And we should make sure that we do it in a responsible way. Now, to do that, let's focus on the high risk so that we secure where it matters the most, and let everything else be as smooth as possible so that we can get medicines faster to market.
Okay, thank you. Goza?
Well, from my side, it would be more like a process or a certification label that can allow me to choose the correct digital solutions when I'm managing my own disease or as a citizen. So I would like to ask her if it would be a possibility to implement, while we're working on the legislations around the whole topic, to actually have some kind of a label that can allow people to have an easier understanding about which digital tool to use, and that will benefit them and that are reliable and actually trustworthy.
Okay, thank you, Louise.
Okay. So I would say health data is there. Health data is being reused. We have all these amazing new technologies with so many potential benefits. But what we have now is we are still in this genesis moment where we're discussing ethical, societal, legal framework on all this. So we have a huge opportunity to co-construct the societal ends with citizens. So please invite citizens and their representatives to sit at the table, because they have very interesting insight to share on how our society should evolve with all this.
Thank you very much, Louise. Very good point. Margie?
I would say to her, whatever you want to build in Europe, whatever our ambitions are, think about the global players, the global data subjects, and the global patients. How can Europe be more of an integrating force so companies like ours can continue to operate without hindering the innovation, as Peter said, to continue supplying medicines to patients all over the world, not just in Europe, and be able to spread that health equity and global access to care.
Okay, thank you. Janos?
Applies to me too. Most probably you will say,
you've taken my answer.
how are we doing all this Most probably she will ask me actually how are we doing in the negotiations of the Council and the European Parliament.
Very
Are
good.
we doing well?
No, thank you very much. I think, let's give a round of applause to the panel. I think they've been super. We've covered a wide range of topics. It's been really interesting. In relation to the European Health Data Space, FEAM has a survey that we're bringing out, timing of it in terms of the survey. In 2 weeks' time, so we'll be sending that to you. It'll be going to a wide group of people, but we will reach out to everybody here plus everybody online. I'd like to thank everybody on the panel. They've really, I think I've worked them reasonably hard, I hope, made them think, made them reflect on some of the areas that I think are really important. Delighted that FEAM concentrated on this area because I think it's one of the key areas in relation to health in Europe over the next decade. So thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to pass over to my colleague, Louise. And I'm just going to move this out of the way before you sit down.
Well, thanks, Mark. Mine will be just quite short remarks, and then I will leave the podium to our president, Stefan Constantinescu. From my point of view, I do really foresee that, real-world data is more and more important. No? We were used to take decisions based on real-world data, and we make research based on data from clinical trials, and now both are mixing. And in some way, we need the same quality and the same structure and the same, let's say, ontology and semantics and interoperability from data on trials and on real-world data. And if we do that properly, and if we are able to succeed on data sharing with whatever solutions we might be able to find, distributed systems, federated learning, data donors or whatever, we might construct the future we just saw today, thanks to the panelists, that I'm pretty sure will open a new era in the way we perform medicine for the benefit of all of us, no? Because at the end we will be also patients one time after the other. So that was my main thanks to all of you. I think it was really inspiring. We saw so many different aspects, and we will have so many new ideas to take back and work on that. And I'm pretty sure we will continue fostering policy on trying to also advise on the policymakers on how to perform properly AI and data structure in Europe. So thanks for that.
Thank you so much, Luis, and thank you to the panel. This was a historical meeting because we are at the beginning of the AI in medicine, and the Federation of European Academies' mission centers to the patient. So we want to see new drugs. We haven't seen them yet. We want to see new diagnostic tests that predict disease and stratify patients, and of course we want to see treatments. We haven't really seen yet a miracle in gastric cancer, pancreatic cancer, glioma, AML, glioblastoma, and all that. So we have to work on it. But to me, AI gives you an intellectual turbo. So we were doing analysis of data for the last 30 years, but now we have an unprecedented power to do it much better and much faster. So there is no doubt that there will be results in the future. So I will start with a few things that I noted. I'm not going to repeat everything that was said today, but clearly what I want to say is that today in our own hospital, we purchased the most advanced medical bioinformatics system, which is called, in French, TPI Carré. It's EPICS. It's an American system, which a lot of Harvard hospitals have. And we learned to use it. But we don't yet use it well. And a lot of people say, well, how does it help me get my paper? Because if you want to be able to get a paper, you have to make a lot of categories for each of your patients, for your disease that you study, and then say, yes, the patient has that or not. So you have to divide into 50, 100 cases and then say yes or no. And then when you mix 200 patients, you're going to have something. But most people still write the patient is doing well, and so the poetry, and do not do this in a format that the program can give you any kind of result. So we have to do a huge effort in educating even the most advanced academics into moving from our craft, our art of medicine, and all our private things that we learned so hard and we don't want to give away because it took us a lot of effort. We want to make a lot of money out of that and a lot of mileage, to really go back with humility, relearn these things which appear simple, but they are absolutely critical. And so making all the systems interoperable came out from this panel very important. So all these hospitals that have to be able to all communicate, to have data in the same format, I think that's going to be an obligation. I also retain the idea that we have to really protect the patient first, and of course the data, but the patient. Don't forget about the patient. Don't confuse, form with substance. Don't confuse tools with the real purpose. The real purpose is not to protect the data, is to really protect the patient and try to advance medicine, and of course research. And I'm coming back to the fact that DeepMind, which now belongs to Google, a few years ago came up with a fantastic tool which we use in basic research, which is called AlphaFold. It's a way to predict structure of proteins, which was the fundamental problem of biology, and they managed to do it with machine learning and AI on soluble proteins, not yet membrane proteins, but we do membrane proteins work, and some of their predictions work, so we're trying to see how good it is at that. And when people analyzed how were they able to achieve this phenomenal success, it's really a question of machine learning and a smart comparison of sequences through species. But in the end, they themselves don't know why it works. So the AI people write papers in PNAS saying the unreasonable success of machine learning, because it's a black box, so they don't know why it works. And of course, it solved the problem in the sense that we can predict today protein, but we don't know the rules by which proteins fold. We just know this is how this sequence will look in space. Why, we don't know. So we are before Newton in mechanics in biology today, and I think the AI will actually get us faster to the moment where the apple will fall down and somebody will figure it out, what are the fundamental rules behind all these things that we are studying now still empirically. So I will end by asking a quick question to each member of the panel, which is the following very precise question, including to Mark first, of course, he's now a panel member. So the question is this: when do you think that we will go to the hospital, take out our card, let's say identity card, and have a chip on it, and then when we register to the info desk at the hospital for our consultation, there will be a chip in there with our genome sequence that will tell the doctors what polymorphisms we have, what drugs we should take, what drugs we should not take, how much of each drug we metabolize, and all this. Would that be in 1 year, in 10, in 100? Will we ever get to this, and is it useful?
Okay, I'm 59 at the moment, so I'll be 60 in January, hopefully by the time I'm 65.
Right.
I think it might be, I think, scientifically possible, but I'm curious if it will be accepted and to what extent it will be accepted, and it would be allowed to be providing such deep information into people's lives and prognostics and so on, and whether they want it, actually.
So it could be that we will not have the whole genome, but some genes of it, some selected parts of the genome that are really important or something.
If it's a selective part of it and the whole thing, I think quite soon.
Okay, yeah.
I would argue some European countries are already halfway there with the chip and the health in their ID card. So it'll be faster in some places than others. Could be 5 years in some of those countries, could be longer, maybe 10 in others.
So I swear this was my answer as well, but I wanted to, I swear. But I would say it depends on the country indeed, because I'm from France and we have a digital ID card since like, it's a question of months, while in Belgium it's been here like for way more time as well, for example, so it will depend on the country.
To cover the whole Europe, I'd say, not individual countries, it's the Z generation. When they're in power, I think that's where it's going to be more operational things with bullet points than concepts and ideas. I think that's where it's going to happen throughout all Europe. They're coming.
I think the theme is already, it will be a long time to adopt and it will look different in different parts, but I definitely think it is sooner rather than later when it comes to early adoption at least. So let's go with the 5 years as well.
Okay. Yeah.
I wondered the card might come, but I'm wondering whether we'll have the interventions to deal with what the card tells us. So maybe 5 years for the card, and then hopefully we'll have some interventions that are meaningful.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, I think this, again, was historical. I'd like to thank Elisa Corritore, Ruben Castro, Hannah Whittle, Laura Gulevich, and others from FEAM for organizing this, our panels, especially Mark and all the people, and finally Luis for a fantastic organization of this panel.